You ever watch someone doing something and nothing that they were doing while they were working on this particular project seemed to make sense? I was thinking about this and I thought, how many of you have ever watched a guy carve a statue with a chainsaw? If you have YouTube or access to YouTube, type chainsaw carving Elvis, and you will see a guy that, most chainsaw carvings are decent for a chainsaw, but they're still a little bit crude. There's a guy can carve the head of Elvis that is a smooth, and he paints it too, which, most chainsaw carvings aren't painted, but I had to watch it just to figure out what he was doing. It's like he's taking big chunks off at a time, and you're like, what in the world? How's this ever going to turn into anything? But the final product was something very different. What I found is when you're watching someone who really, truly knows what they're doing, you probably don't have a clue of what they're doing until the end, and then there's that aha moment where you are blown away with that. How many of you have had things happen in your life that first seem totally random? They seem like you were looking like, what are you doing? Why is this happening to my life? They seem not only random, but maybe completely out of control. But in that seeming chaos, you can tell, or in the end could look back and see how that was working together to accomplish something that maybe was for you, or was maybe even something that you had even asked for or requested. I was thinking 12 years ago was my 30th birthday, and I should have known something was up because my brother-in-law wanted to go hunting with me, and we don't get along real well, let alone to go hunting. But he just insisted, there's this new property. I want you to go hunting on this property. And I want to go together where I'm going to film you. It'll be your birthday. And so finally we went. I didn't like where we were set up. And we wasn't seeing anything except for does. And I was like, it's my birthday. I'm shooting a doe. So I told him as much, and in the process of me, and we were bow hunting, of me drawing the bow to shoot the doe, he dropped something from the tree. Now, I don't think any of you are bow hunters, so you probably don't understand how bad that really is. But the deer is from me to Sabrina here, and he dropped something, which means the deer not only runs as fast as it can, which you're not going to shoot with a bow if you're a good bow hunter. And second of all, the deer stomped and snorted and blew, which meant no other deer in the country was going to come anywhere near that particular property. Now, if you know me and all my patience, you understand that I was just calm and peaceful and wanted to hug him really tight around the neck. And I was aggravated, so I was like, we're leaving. So we come out of the tree. He's like, oh no, maybe we should stay. No, we're leaving. So we get to his truck, and he's like, starts reaching in his pockets, and he's like, oh no, I can't find my keys. We go through his bag, the camera bag, through my bag. We walked back to where we were hunting, looked in the leaves, and all of a sudden he's like, when it started getting dark, he's like, oh, it's in my pocket. By this time, hugging him around the neck wasn't really what I wanted to do. I wanted to do a lot more graphic things. Finally, we get to the truck, we get to the house, to my 30th surprise birthday party. All the chaos that night suddenly came into view. My wife had talked him into taking me hunting so she could control what time I got home. If I would have shot the deer, we would have been way too late because we'd been cleaning it, taking it to the processor. But then I messed it up when I got out of the tree early because we got home before everything was set up, so he had to lose his keys to drag that out till dark. But what seemed like a horrific evening and a doofus actually came into view that he was doing what was requested, and it was for my benefit. In our lives, many times we try to watch what God is doing, and we try to figure out why things are happening around us, why things are happening to us. And it's much the same way. Either first, we don't see and understand what God is doing because every action He takes has a definite purpose, and we don't understand that purpose. Or we try to figure out exactly why He's doing what He's doing in that particular time, in that particular way, and that doesn't work either. The reason is because God's methods are beyond our comprehension. In Romans chapter 11 it says, and this is the New Living Translation, "Oh, how great are God's riches and wisdom and knowledge! How impossible is it for us to understand His decisions and His ways." My interpretation of what Paul was writing here is, you will never understand God's thought process. You will never understand the methods that He uses to get things accomplished. So quit trying, quit stressing over those particular things. To help us understand that, I want us to take just a moment and consider the methods that God has used throughout history. It's Christmas, so in particular, let's think of the Christmas story. Have you ever sat and really just stepped away from your knowledge of the Christmas story and stepped away from the assumed understanding and reception of the story and just looked at it? I mean, does any of it really make sense to us why He would use those things? I mean, we can give the Sunday school answer and say, well, of course. I mean, just look back. No, I'm talking just outside of that, look at it. See, if I was writing a story of redemption or the redemption of mankind, my story would be very different than God's. How many of you would agree with that? I mean, it wouldn't have started in a barn, first of all. Okay? God sent His Son to a barn, to a stable, to a manger, or they laid Him in a manger in a feeding trough. Think about how God chose to reveal His Son. In my story, it would have probably involved a cape and some awesome superpowers. But God sent His Son, our Savior, as a helpless, defenseless baby who wasn't born in a palace but a barn. Wasn't born to royalty but plain, ordinary, even obscure individuals with a lot of clouds of questions over their heads. God's ways do not make sense in our lives. Isaiah 55 verses 8 and 9 speaks of that. "My thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, says the Lord. And my ways are far beyond anything you could imagine. For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." I don't know about you, but a lot of times I'm kind of like the Israelites. See, the Israelites thought they knew what God was thinking. They thought they knew what God was planning. In fact, they thought they understood that so much that when God sent them the Messiah He had promised, they crucified Him because He was not what they expected. See, they had the Messiah as this political leader who would put their enemies, the Romans and all the other surrounding nations, in their place. He would answer their immediate need. But see, God had a much bigger plan, because instead of God ridding them of their immediate enemy, God's Messiah would defeat the true enemy of all time. His wisdom and knowledge is far greater than ours. How many times are we guilty of praying for a specific thing, praying for a specific answer for today, and then when God gives us an answer that will take care of us for a much longer time, because it wasn't the answer we expected, we get discouraged and depressed. See, like the Israelites, we too are foolish. We too try to fit God into our mold, into the mold of our understanding. Make His plans and purpose try to conform to ours instead of ours striving to fit into His. If you read the Bible, we really shouldn't be surprised at God's methods. Think about it. He chose Abraham to be the father of his nation. Abraham, the liar, who gave his wife to be married to the king and said it was his sister, not one time, but twice. I mean, let's face it, Abraham was a slow learner. He chose Joseph, the dreamer, who was looked down on by his family because he was next to the youngest son of Jacob, to be the Savior of not only that family, but to the Israelites, and not only to the Israelites, but the entire Egyptian nation. He chose David, the shepherd, to be king of Israel, the one whose father, whenever Samuel came and said, "Listen, I'm going to anoint a king," didn't even call him out of the field because he didn't see him as being a potential for the king. He chose Bethlehem, a small, insignificant spot in Israel, to be the birthplace of His Son. Tonight I ask you, do you see a pattern in the way God was doing that? Over and over again, God chose plain, ordinary people to do His extraordinary work. In the words of the prophet, how impossible it is for us to understand God's decisions, for us to understand His ways. Think about Luke's record of the birth of Christ. Joseph and Mary traveled to Bethlehem at just the right time. What a coincidence, right? For the Jesus to be born in a stable, wrapped in cloths and laid in a feeding trough. In God's story of His Son coming, to celebrate the occasions, angels announce Christ's birth. I'll be honest, as I read this story tonight, with trying to read it with fresh eyes, I was like, he finally got something that would have matched my story. Angels coming and proclaiming the birth of the Savior. Then I began to think, who did the angels proclaim it to? Shepherds. If you don't understand the culture, you know, we glorify shepherds. They come in, they're all cute little kids with little animals and all these different things. But shepherds were considered ritually unclean. They wasn't even allowed to go to church because of their occupation. They were considered the dregs of society. We don't even have a person or a position in our society that we can equate to shepherds. I was thinking about an article I read about Tent City in Portsmouth, and that would be about the closest thing we could come to. Before you start thinking about the people who thought the shepherds were crazy, imagine if the people from behind Bob Evans or Bob and Floyd's come running over the hill and said, "An angel just spoke to us and said that Jesus is here." Yeah. I don't imagine if they went running into any church in Portsmouth and said that, they would have been taken very seriously. But the angels announced the birth of Christ to ordinary people who were doing their ordinary jobs. The more you think about it, the more incredible the Christmas story becomes. In fact, it's almost unbelievable how God uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. If the method of His birth doesn't throw you, think about the time on earth that He spent after His resurrection. In my story, if I was writing the story of Jesus, if I was doing the plans, as soon as He came from the tomb, He would have been marching into the synagogue saying, I told you I was the Messiah. I told you that if you destroyed this temple, in 3 days I would raise it up. I told you. But instead, who did Jesus appear to? First, He appeared to a group of women. That may not seem that extraordinary to you, except for women who were considered in that particular culture to be untrustworthy. Men didn't even speak to women, let alone rely on them to carry the story that Jesus had risen. Then He appeared to His followers, ordinary people, and gave them the responsibility to go make disciples, to baptize and teach them to obey everything that He had commanded them. Think about it. The entire gospel rested on people who had previously been untrustworthy, who before following Christ were uneducated, and a lot of them had shady past. God's decisions and ways are impossible for us to understand. Paul comments on how God uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary work in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. It says, remember, dear brothers and sisters, that few of you were wise in the world's eyes. Instead, God chose things that the world considered foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise. And He chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. As a result, no one can ever boast in the presence of God. From Isaiah to Matthew, from Matthew to Corinthians, God's methods did not change. He still uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary work. Your ability is not nearly as important as your attitude and your availability. Think about that for a minute. God doesn't need you to be able to do something. He needs you to be available and willing to listen to Him to do what He asks you to do. I shared a discussion with John Jolly a while back, or recently, and listen, Peter couldn't pay the taxes. All he had to do was be obedient and go fishing, which is what he could do. And through that, God provided the provision necessary to pay the taxes. He couldn't walk on water either, but when Jesus told him to come to Him, guess what? He was walking on the water for a while. The disciples couldn't come up with the amount of food necessary to feed the multitude. But what did they do? They went and collected the lunch, which is what Christ commanded them to do. They couldn't go to the world and make disciples, except for all power on heaven and earth was given to Him. And He said, lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the world. This evening, maybe you're here and you're feeling kind of down. You're feeling maybe worthless and like you can't accomplish anything. The last few weeks I've talked to Dad quite a bit, and it's a challenge to him because he's like, I can't do it. What can I possibly do for God right here? Maybe you feel like you don't have what it takes to make a difference in your own life, let alone your own house, let alone your own community or the world. Tonight I just want to encourage you to think about the God story. Think about even the Christmas story. If you feel that way, there's a good chance you're in the perfect position to do some extraordinary work for God. Maybe you're in an absolute mess and nothing is making sense. Everything just seems utterly chaotic. Right now, in that chaos, there's a good chance God is working what seems like chaos, and maybe even completely insane to you, is going exactly according to His plan. So just hold on. Maybe tonight you're having major doubts as to how God can work your particular situation out for His good, for your good, or for anyone else's good. Maybe every time you think you have it figured out, He changes everything. Something happens and the thing that you thought you understood is once again crushed. God's methods were never intended to be understood by us. I remember when I was diagnosed, and this is not planning from my part, but I started paying into retirement when I was 15. My goal, if you know my story, was to get as far away from Soda County and really from church as I possibly could. Well, hello, I live 300 yards from where I was raised, pastor a church that's less than 5 miles from my house. Yeah, my plans didn't work real well. But see, God's plans were for me to start, or at least I thought they were, for me to start at 15, move to another job that continued the same retirement. I could retire at 45. With income, which meant I could do full-time ministry without ever having to rely on anyone or any particular group. It made sense to me. So when I was diagnosed and told that I didn't have very long to live, one of my prayers was, God, what are you doing? I thought that this was the plan. And Brett, I remember, it wasn't an audible voice, but it was like, I didn't say that was my plan. You just thought it was. And a lot of the passages that I've shared with you tonight come rolling through my mind and said, listen, His ways, our ways are not His. Our thoughts are not His. His is much higher than we can ever imagine. So once again, I was scared all over thinking, well, what are you doing? In this chaos, in this very fearful time where I was terrified for my family, what are you doing? But you know, looking back in that chaos, He was shaping me, but He was also opening doors of opportunity that I could reach people that I would never be able to reach. And tonight I am confident that there are people in heaven that are in heaven because I was able to be the hands and feet of Christ to them because of the chaos that I went through that we call leukemia. Maybe every time you think you have it figured out, something happens and your understanding is just blown away. Tonight, can I just remind you that God is faithful? Can I remind you He promises in the end it will work out for His good? You may not see it clearly now, but will you just trust Him enough to give Him time to complete and have complete control of your life and the situation that is in it? I can go through each one of your lives and tell you specific times that I was praying and my prayer started out, God, what are you doing? Why would you be doing this? For Sarah, it was when she applied for a job that she didn't get. What are you doing? This doesn't make sense. Amanda and I, we have a whole list of times, but that one would probably be when I heard her crying herself to sleep, and I was like, God, if there's anyone that doesn't deserve this, it's her. For Sabrina, it was a time that I remember when Tim was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. He seemed like he had it kind of together, but not so much her. I could go on and on and on. Can you just remember the times in the past that seemed chaotic, that seemed like it wasn't making sense, and look back on those times and realize that God was working it out, that He had a plan, that He was the master of the situation, and while it didn't make sense to us, it made perfect sense to Him because He's God. I want you to think about your situation. I want you to think about your particular issue. Maybe the particular issues in your family right now. Things that you are praying about that it doesn't look like there's any good resolution for the situation. I want you to think about that as you watch this video, and then we'll close. Go ahead, Tim. From time to time in our lives, we look at the story God is writing and we think we know what it is. We think we know the direction He's going, and then utter chaos. But at some point, if we remain faithful and trust Him, He will turn it upside down. We will see the picture, and we will realize that He was there in every aspect of that. Now, I've watched this video, I don't know, probably close to 20 times. It's still hard for me to see that picture in it. But you know what? One of the first things that the artist designed or drew was the eye. He knew from the very beginning, from the time that he made that first line with the eye in it, exactly what the end result was going to be. And we have to trust God that in the story of our lives, it's not going to make sense to us. The story of His own Son's life didn't make sense to us when we really think about it. But we can believe and trust in the verse that says, I will never leave you or forsake you. That I will be with you until the end of the earth. I will take care of you. There's another verse that says, nothing can separate us from the love of God. That regardless of the situations that we are enduring or going through, His presence is there. I'll ask you to bow your heads just for a minute. I don't know what you may be struggling with or what you may be going through right now. Maybe it's not a situation, but it's situations, decisions, complications that is happening. You just trust Him in that He will work that out, that it will be beneficial. It may not be without pain. It may not be without complications. But just believe that He is going to work it out for you. Father, we come to You tonight. We are so thankful for who You are, for what You do in our lives. And God, as aggravating as it is sometimes to not know what Your plan is, to not see the picture or the final result of what the situation is, it's hard sometimes to just trust You. So I'm asking that You be with me tonight in the situations that I'm looking at and thinking about, and the situations that each person here tonight is considering in their hearts and minds as well.